everyone, and welcome back to the show. Today, my guest is Mike Cangi, and he is the founder of FareRx. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, JT.
Yeah, thank you for coming on and taking the time. I'd love to start out. Maybe you could describe how you got personally interested in the health and organic food sphere and a little bit about what FareRx does.
Yeah, definitely. So I think my journey to starting FareRx was not a traditional one when it comes to the fact that we are building a healthcare company right now, focused on food, focused on nutrition. But I am not a clinician. I didn't come from a healthcare background. I'm not a registered dietitian. I had no real experience when it came to the healthcare industry or space at all when I walked into this. What I did have experience in, though, is building businesses that have an impact and make a difference outside of just profitability. And that's what drew me in and led me to start building FareRx was the problem. And the problem was really clear. What started to click was when I had kids. So I have 4 little kids right now. I have a 6-year-old, a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 1-year-old. And once you have kids, you start thinking even more about food because you're not just feeding yourself anymore, you're feeding them. And you start looking at labels a little bit more and you start becoming a little bit more aware. At least for me personally, that was part of the journey here. And then as you started understanding what is happening as a country here in the US, and I looked around and 6 in 10 Americans have at least one chronic illness. So 60% of the population has at least one chronic illness. 4 in 10 have 2 or more chronic illnesses. And this is something that is continuing to get worse and the problems are compounding. And I was curious to understand, why is that the case when medicine has clearly advanced over the past several decades, but it's gone in the wrong direction is the food system and the types of foods that we're getting and buying and eating. And you go back to, my kids and the food that they're eating, you start to look at the ingredient list on something as simple as a yogurt, and you realize that everything has added sugars, everything has added dyes. And these are things in some cases that didn't even exist 30 years ago, some of these ingredients that we've added into foods, and now they've become standard. And that's now what is all across the grocery store shelves and has become a standard part of the American diet. And with all those people who have a chronic illness in the United States, 80% of chronic illness is driven by nutrition. So that's where the light bulb started to go off. And there was an opportunity, I thought, to, well, what if we approach this a little bit differently? And as opposed to treating these patients or these health insurance plan members, what if instead we were able to start at the root cause of this? Because the root cause is very clearly food and diet. Now, there's a lot of different factors that goes into why people aren't eating these foods. There's transportation issues, there's access issues with food deserts and food insecurity. So there's so many different factors that play into it. A lot of different, in the healthcare space, they call it SDOH, or social determinants of health. So the things in and around yourself that are not necessarily tied to healthcare, but they affect your ability to stay healthy. And as I learned more about it, we were fortunate enough to put a model together that was focused first on seniors and getting seniors healthy foods, specifically ones that have chronic illness. And that was kind of the nexus of FareRx. And what it has become today is a company that is focused solely on nutrition. We work directly with health plans, so we don't have a direct consumer model. It's all B2B, and we're working to build nutrition plans for seniors who have chronic illness. And that is now expanded to outside of just senior populations into all populations. And the way that we do it is very simple. And sometimes I think simple is better when it comes to healthcare, because healthcare can be so complicated. And what we do is we put together bags of groceries that are tailored directly to the member's needs and whatever their conditions are. So they're called medically tailored groceries is what we build. And those bags of groceries are designed by a registered dietitian that's on our team. And every week a member is getting a entire bag. It's usually somewhere between 16 and 20 pounds of food, not just a produce box. It has every major food group, and it's meant and tailored specifically to the diet that they should be following based on their conditions. And it's also, we've started indexing for things like cultural relevancy, because food is so personal and it's so cultural that what you eat may be very different than what I eat. And we need to acknowledge that, because the end goal of this program is to make sure the members are actually eating the food that we're sending to them. So if we send somebody that's never eaten an avocado in their first week, why would they choose to take the risk and try it today? And we first have to build that trust. So we've layered in a lot of different things in order to help enable that trust along the way and make sure that the members are actually adhering to the groceries that we're sending them. And at the end of the day, it's affecting them more than just physical health. There's kind of this mental and emotional health too, because there's dignity in this. There's the agency and the member being able to create their own dishes and learning how to cook new recipes and eating foods that are making them feel better, both physically as well as emotionally.
Yeah. Wow, there's a lot to unpack in there. So maybe I could try to pick off a couple different ones to dive into a little bit further. So you said you work with the health plans. Is that like insurance companies, or what are the maybe structural players that are involved there?
Yeah, and I'll try to stay away from the jargon as much as I can, because that was one of the things when I entered into this space, having zero experience in the healthcare space. I remember going to a conference a couple years ago, right when we started FareRx, and I sat in this room for about 2 hours, and I left with 4 pages of notes with acronyms of stuff that I had no idea what they were talking about. And it was, they're like, everybody was speaking a different language. So even something as simple as a health plan, it's like, what the hell is a health plan?
Right.
And the other word that you hear thrown out a lot of times is the payer. Well, a health plan or a payer, yes, is exactly what you said. That's the insurance company. So you've heard of, Aetna, Humana, United, Blue Cross Blue Shield. Those are all health plans, and those are the ones, or the health insurance companies are the ones that typically, those are our customers that we work with, and that then allows us to reach broader populations. And specifically within their membership, they are the ones that we're kind of co-creating and understanding which of those populations of members would be best served with FareRx grocery delivery.
So would that health plan identify their members almost like for the members, or is it the individual say, I'm on a health plan and I reach out to my insurance provider, say, hey, I've heard about this program through FareRx where they deliver groceries, like, am I eligible? Is that kind of, how does one as an individual maybe get into the program?
Yeah, so typically the former, but sometimes the latter. So most often we would sit down with the health plan and talk about a specific population that is struggling within their health plan. So it would be, all right, we have, 40% of our members are diabetic, and we really want to find a way to help our members with diabetes. Or we have this percentage of our population that has hypertension. We want to figure out what we can do through nutrition to help these members. And so typically it starts at a population level like that, maybe even geographic. There's a lot of other factors. There's other social determinant of health factors that the plan will look at with us, and will determine this is the population that's most at risk, that could most benefit from an intervention like this. And that's where the initial targeting comes from. But as the program grows and builds, what we have seen is that, yes, I'm delivering groceries to you, JT, and all of a sudden you're feeling better. Your neighbor sees that you're getting a bag of groceries dropped off every week, and you see this FareRx delivery van outside every week, and they're asking you, what's up with this FareRx van? What are you getting? And you're like, oh, well, I'm getting these amazing groceries that are getting delivered every week. And they're like, well, who's giving them? Oh, my insurance company is. It's from Blue Cross Blue Shield. And you're like, oh, interesting. I have Blue Cross Blue Shield. Can I get these groceries? So then we do get referrals that way. But typically, the member has to have that same condition criteria set, because all of that rolls back up to a bunch of regulation when the health plan builds these programs from the start. So that's all the not fun, super technical stuff, a bunch of different jargon and acronyms that goes all the way up to the top. So there's an organization, an agency called CMS, that is essentially the governmental organization that oversees all health plans throughout the United States, specifically ones that deal with Medicare and Medicaid. And because those are government programs, they are funded and subsidized by the federal government. And CMS is the governmental agency that oversees all of those programs, and they set the rules and the structure for who can get what. And if you're going to give it to one person, then you have to give it to everyone. So that's
Oh,
typically why the criteria sets are so tight.
interesting. So I know a lot of these bigger systems like healthcare and insurance, they have incentives in one direction or another, and sometimes the economic incentive of the person, the patient, the customer are maybe not necessarily aligned with the insurance company or the healthcare system. Have you found that? I mean, it seems to me logically, if the person's eating clean food, they'll probably have less health problems, thus would have lower medical bills, so the insurance company would be paying less. Have you seen any distortions of that, places where it's almost a roadblock when you're coming up because you seemingly have a pretty straightforward value proposition to them? What's that conversation been like?
Yeah. So the value proposition for FareRx is straightforward and it is simple, but it's also contrary to how healthcare in the US has typically functioned. So the way that healthcare is built today is that we treat people after they've gotten sick. We don't treat them preventatively. And that's where we have flipped the model on their head. And that's where it's going to take a while for programs like FareRx and other organizations that are doing similar food as medicine interventions to really catch on, because it's going to take time for the entire system and the health plans to understand the value and be able to show the value, because they are businesses as well, and with extremely razor thin margins a lot of times, that they have to find a way to integrate these types of programs that doesn't break the business and doesn't break the system, because they're not used to spending money up front on a member. They're used
Mm,
to having their actuaries and their medical econ teams behind the scenes predicting at a population level how many times is JT going to get sick this year, how many times you're going to go to the ER, how many times are you going to have to see a specialist. And they are then saying and putting a number to that and saying, all right, this is how much JT is probably going to cost us this year. This is how much his premium should be. He belongs to this larger organization, and these are the costs associated with that organization. So here's their premiums, and this is what we're expecting to pay out. So they do take on a lot of risk, and because of that, they are very cautious. And what we are doing is bucking that system, because we are saying to health plans, hey, instead of waiting for your member to develop diabetes, you have pre-diabetic members. You know that when they become diabetic, they're going to end up on a laundry list of prescription medications. When they get on those prescription medications, type 2 diabetics typically stay type 2 diabetics for life. And you're going to be paying for that member to be on those medications for the rest of their life, or as long as they're with your plan. And the challenge becomes, we are trying to incentivize them to make the investment up front to potentially prevent that member from developing the chronic illness that may be coming down the line. That's where the incentives aren't always aligned, because people jump from health plan to health plan. You know, the average time spent at a health plan is typically only about 3 years. And that's because people change employers, or they are shopping for a new plan, or their employer is shopping for a new plan. So the value that we create may not actually be seen by the plan that they are in right now. So those are some of the roadblocks and challenges that I've had over the past couple of years of trying to build this business. Is yes, the value prop is there, but the ROI that the health plans are typically look for, they want to see instant ROI. And a lot of these types of interventions, they're not going to have an instant return on investment. It is going to have a return on investment in multiple different areas, though, because I like to think of food as just our entry point, and that is kind of the beginning of where the care starts with FareRx. But the benefits that come with our team being on the phone with members, our team delivering these groceries to members in person. There's a bunch of different benefits that get wrapped around that core grocery service that are helping the member with some of those other social determinants of health outside of just the food.
right. So yeah, it's kind of like you're paying on the front end to then save much more on the back end. I feel like that's a metaphor and parallel in so many other things in life. Like just go into the gym. Like this morning, the short term, it's going to be painful. You got to wake up, you got to go lift the weights, you got to feel the pain. But then in the very long run, you'll be much better off because you'll have better health outcomes and just like a stronger and healthier life down the end of the line. But yeah, it's interesting that you're mentioning because maybe some customers will switch different companies. They'll be like, oh, like I don't want to invest in this person, and then they just leave me anyway. I think it's like a catch 22 that also a lot of corporations face when investing in young talent. They're like, well, if we spend all this money and train them and educate them, they'll just go and leave for a different company and take all that education and use it to someone else's advantage. But then it's like, all right, well, you're just not going to train anybody. You're just not going to invest in anything. And then everyone's just going to be worse off in the end.
That's a perfect analogy too, though, because when you make those investments, I mean, if you take it back to a employer, when you invest in your team and when you invest in your employees, what does that do? Well, it typically results in better satisfaction, better retention of those employees. They're going to stay longer. They're going to be happier. They're going to be more productive. And guess what? The same thing is true for a member that is associated with a health insurance company. If you are giving these benefits to people, and we've seen this firsthand in the data that we collect, is that the members that are receiving FareRx groceries are happier. They are more satisfied, not just with the product that they get from us, but that reflects on the health insurance plan of how they feel about their health insurance company. And a lot of times, I mean, health insurance companies don't necessarily have the best reputation. And there's not many people that are out there singing the praises of their health plan. But members that are receiving FareRx, they are looking very highly of their health plan because they're like, wow, my health insurance company actually cares about me. And they're giving me free food and they're trying to make me healthier. And all of a sudden, the switching cost for that member becomes a little bit higher because they become a little bit more emotionally invested and they are, appreciative of what they are getting. And that is then leading to better retention, which is also extremely valuable. It's because in any type of business, the cost of retaining a customer is always less than the cost of acquiring a new customer. So if they are able to keep these members for 4 years, 5 years instead of 3 years, there again is the value proposition of something like FareRx. So getting them to think that way and being able to show and prove the outcomes and show and prove the ROI that's the burden that's on FareRx. And that's what we're working on constantly, is extracting as much data as we can to show that these programs not only work from a clinical perspective. So yes, we're going to reduce hospital utilization. We're going to reduce ER visits. We're going to reduce readmissions. We're going to lower A1Cs. We're going to lower BMI. All of those things are true from a clinical perspective. But then how do we show value outside of that? And those are the other areas where are harder to quantify, but we know that we help with social isolation for folks that are living alone and not having a lot of interaction. We have one of our team members is at their doorstep every week, sometimes bringing the groceries into their kitchen, sometimes putting the groceries into their refrigerator. They become somebody to talk to for 5 minutes or 10 minutes while they're there. We also help with transportation because there's a lot of people out there that lack transportation to even get healthy food. And that then falls into kind of food access challenges and food deserts that we have so frequently, especially in major metros. I mean, we're based in Philadelphia, and Philadelphia is a food desert. We have the majority of Philadelphians have somewhere to buy food within a block of where they live, but the quality of the food at those locations is typically full of ultra processed foods and is not real food. Everything that we are sending in a FareRx grocery bag is all fresh, whole foods, nothing prepackaged, and some members simply don't have access to those things. So once you start to quantify all of those additional benefits, the ROI story does become more clear. But once again, this is contrary to how the system has been built. It hasn't been built to focus on prevention. The system has been built to focus on treatment.
Right. Right. I can't imagine the challenge that you must face kind of being that first mover. So thank you for blazing that trail ahead and putting in the legwork so that the rest of society and these structures can kind of see the light and see a better way of doing things, like you're saying, trying to have lifestyles and have access to healthier food so that people don't get sick, so that we're not just relying on a system that just treats symptoms after we already are sick. Maybe we
And
could
it's
talk.
not just it's the other thing, sorry to interrupt you, but it's not even just a health crisis, it's a financial crisis tied to it as well. Healthcare as an industry is the largest in the country. It's a $5
Right.
trillion industry. And the
Mm.
cost of healthcare is continuing to rise across the board and is projected to become up to $8 trillion over the next 5 years. So the amount that is being spent and the cost to the everyday average American is increasing in their healthcare premiums as well. And a lot of times the care is not getting better and people aren't getting healthier. We have, you've heard probably plenty of people say we don't have a healthcare system, we have a sick care system. And in a lot of cases, that is the case, is that we have healthcare, we call it healthcare, but it really is only there for when we get sick and when something is wrong, as opposed to focusing on staying healthy. So the implications of this are more than just making sure that we can reduce these chronic illnesses or prevent these chronic illnesses from starting, but it's also a financial opportunity as a country for us to rethink what we're doing, because what we're doing right now is just simply not working. We spend more than any other country in the world on healthcare, yet we have worse outcomes than every other country. So there's an issue there, and we need to rethink the model, because it's not only making us sicker, but it's going to bankrupt us as well.
Right. Yeah. The number, I mean, $8 trillion or $5 trillion, it makes my tiny human brain explode. It's like I can't even fathom what that looks like. I remember I took a class in DC on the federal budget process and things like that. And the professor drew on the board a big pie chart and sectioned off like 3/4 of the whole pie of the federal budget is spent on Medicare and Medicaid.
Yep.
And then you slice the rest of that 1/4 and let's maybe defense spending, and then the rest of it is like everything else discretionary. It's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Wait a minute. Like, I thought military spending was so crazy. I thought all these other programs were so crazy. Politicians are talking about this program wasting money, this program wasting money. If you just save a small little slice of that healthcare spending, you can pay for all of the rest of it, like
Yep.
multiple times over. And I just, in that moment, it just didn't make any sense. Like, how has that runaway train gotten so far where healthcare is almost everything? Like, 75 cents out of every taxpayer dollar that I send is going to healthcare. If you can make any sort of percentage improvements there, then all of our budget concerns kind of go out the window, it seems. Is that how you see it too?
Without a doubt. I mean, like I said, it is a economic problem just as much as it is a health problem. And we need to rethink the models because they're clearly not working right now. So if we can find ways to move that needle slowly but surely, not only are people going to be healthier, which also has an impact because healthier people are more productive. They are more
Mm-hmm.
likely to be in the workforce. I mean, at the end of the day, there's a lot of these chronic illnesses. Eventually, as they continue to progress, they can lead to a position where that member can no longer work. And then they're taken out of the workforce. And
Mm-hmm.
the tax dollars that we have are still funding the programs that are helping support them. But there's also, with some of the programs that already exist and are already out there. And some of the challenges that I've seen again firsthand are things like the National School Lunch Program, which is on at face value seems like and sounds like, and I think was probably intentioned to be a very necessary and needed program. And it is, because there's so many kids that go to school. My wife was a elementary school teacher for the school district of Philadelphia. So she dealt with some of the kids that had nothing, and their meals at school were sometimes the only meals that they could count on. So that program allowing them to have food, because, kind of on this continuum, if you will, of what the nutrition issues are, we are really focused. The first is hunger. And food insecurity is like the very base. First and foremost, people need to have something to eat. But then as you start to get more critical, you start to look at what they are eating and how do we make sure that we're not just filling our bodies with calories, but we're filling them with the right calories. And we spend hundreds of millions of dollars every year on the National School Lunch Program. National School Lunch Program. Yet when you look at the corporations behind the National School Lunch Program and you look at the foods that are going into our schools, you'll realize that some of the food that is going into these programs is not food at all. It's prepackaged junk. It's ultra processed food. It is filled with all kinds of added dyes, chemicals, preservatives, and it is anything but nutritious. So that's the difference between food and nutrition. Again, is that we may be serving the food need with a program like that, but then are we actually serving a nutrition need with programs like that? And that's why I think government a lot of times in healthcare gets a bad rap is because we are spending tons of dollars on these programs, which again were well intentioned and do have opportunity, but then we've allowed our capitalistic society, and don't get me wrong, I am a conscious capitalist. I've always built businesses for impact because I believe in the power and then therefore the responsibility of business to do good. But not every corporation thinks that way. And there's a lot of corporations that are only focused on their shareholders. They're focused on their bottom line. And it's those companies that are okay with sending a Lunchable into the National School Lunch Program and into schools across the country that are filled with garbage calories that are actually making kids sicker. And those same kids that are receiving food from the National School Lunch Program are the same kids that are likely on Medicaid and receiving healthcare services. So you see where it becomes a perpetuating cycle and spiral on the negative side, where we have the opportunity to flip that model on its head and get kids and adults healthy food first. Because if we do that, we're then able to reduce the spending long term for these members.
Yeah, and something that just maybe like a little bit of a philosophical tangent, but you
Yeah.
mentioned corporations don't think like this, and I feel like as soon as a company loses its founder, say a company's been around for 100 years and the founder is long dead, and you have board of advisors and a CEO and this, that, and the other, there's no accountability as far as like a person with a moral compass anymore. Then it just becomes like a formula or an algorithm on a spreadsheet somewhere. And it's like, okay, the shareholders want maximum profits and the employees want maximum pay or whatnot. And then let's spit out whatever decisions are the best ones to be made here. So there's no longer any sort of soul to these decision making of like, am I doing the right thing as this enterprise? It's like this idea of a corporation that kind of just runs away. So I used to maybe get mad in my own day to day of like, oh, they're out to get us, but it's all just individual people at the end of the day too, and they're all just trying to make money, support their families, pay the mortgage, this, that, and the other. So I think it just comes down to the individual, almost on the consumer level. I feel like it might need to change as far as just individual choices when you're going into the store and what you're buying, so that that algorithm has a different input that's saying, oh, the customers actually want something that's not going to kill them. Like that will then change the decision making of these kind of abstract concepts of corporate decision making at the higher point. So maybe could use that as a segue into, you're talking about the quality of the food. Like how do those decisions, like you're working on a bigger scale than just one person, like
Yep.
individual going to the grocery store, like how are you sourcing these things? How are you making decisions as far as what's a good food item to purchase for the customers?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as we are building these grocery bags and we're putting these menus together, we work close with our RD first and foremost to figure out what types of foods work best for their condition. Once we've identified the types of food that ideally go in these bags, then we start sourcing and figuring out where we can get them from. And our goal is to source 50% or more of all of the food that is going into the bag locally. So within 100 miles of wherever that member population is, our goal is to hit 50%. In a lot of cases, in a lot of months, it's 80+% of the food is coming locally, but the goal is to always stay at 50%. And the reason behind that is that there's a lot of research that shows the nutritional density of local foods are higher because there's less transportation involved. But that when it gets on the member's plate, it is actually higher quality food than something that's coming from further away. There's some cases where we can't do that. There's certain foods that we can't produce or grow here, at least locally in our region. And that would be the case for anywhere in the country or anywhere in the world. So some of the food does have to come from outside of that local parameter, but it's focused on getting the best quality and freshest food possible for the best price possible, because the goal is to get as much food in every single bag as physically possible for us to still maintain a sustainable business. And that's always the trade-off of running a company in a way that is focused on more than the bottom line, is that you can have a mission driven or impact driven company, but you still need to build a business, and you still need to make sure that the business itself is sustainable, or else the impact goes away. We're at the point now, we've delivered 100,000 bags of groceries to seniors now, something I'm
Congrats.
really proud of. But that program can't scale if we don't make a profit and if it's not a sustainable business. So that's what we're always managing. But I'm also not running this company to say, what are the cheapest foods that I can get into this bag that are going to work in order to grow the business, maximize profits? That's not the goal. The goal is to grow the business so we can in tandem grow the impact. And I want to work with as many members. The goal that I have internally is like, I can't wait until we deliver our 1 millionth bag of groceries and be able to reach 1 million people with FareRx food, because that's when we are starting to actually make a dent in the overall population of the area or of the country. And it's a tough balancing act. It's one that actually goes back to, are you familiar with certified B corporations?
Vaguely, maybe you
So
can describe it.
yeah, so the B corporation movement or organization was actually a major inspiration for myself and kind of my journey as an entrepreneur, because when I was in college, I went to Temple University outside of Philly, or in Philly, I should say. And while I was there, at one of these kind of lectures that we had, one of the founders of N1 footwear came in. Do you remember N1, the sneaker
Yeah.
brand? Yeah,
Yeah,
the
basketball.
basketball brand. Exactly. So
Yeah.
N1 basketball was huge. They were, at the time of their peak, they were the number 2 basketball brand in the world. So above Reebok, above Adidas, they were only below Nike. That's how much penetration they had made. They'd really made a name for themselves. And they're local guys as well that started this. So the company was founded in PA, and they had a heart to build a business that did more than just make money. And they had built this company to do just that. They were doing a ton of community work. They had this N1 mixtape tour that was traveling around different
Yeah.
cities.
So
And
good.
yeah, exactly. You remember that? That was like, you had to have a pair of N1s when you were, as a, me growing up in like the late 90s, like that was the basketball. That was the cool basketball sneaker that you had to have.
Right.
And so I remember listening to one of the founders, Bart Houlihan, came in to speak at Temple. And when he came in, he was talking about what it was like building a company that had community service and work kind of built into their DNA, and then selling that company to private equity, and what it felt like once they sold it to private equity, because all of those community initiatives that they were spending dollars on to support the local communities slowly but surely were stripped out, and it became a shell of the company that they had built in the first place. And that's where it motivated and inspired the former founders of N1 Footwear to then build what's now called B Lab, which certifies B corporations or benefit corporations. And benefit corporations are companies that are for-profit organizations that have rewritten their articles of incorporation to include work that is focused on people, planet, environment, all into what the business is built around. And that was one of the kind of light bulb moments for me as an early entrepreneur in my 20s that inspired me to start United by Blue, which was my first company that was focused on ocean and waterway conservation, and haven't lost that. And B Lab has only grown in the past 15 years. So we were with United by Blue, my first company, we were, I think, one of the first 300 certified B corporations. So they do an entire audit of everything about your company, everything from the power that you're consuming to employee pay, the difference between your lowest employee pay and your highest executive pay. They're looking at your manufacturing, your sourcing, every piece of your business to say that this business actually cares. It's kind of a stamp of approval. And it's one that I look at very highly, and I look for more and more as I shop because it has become something that you will notice. Now that I'm saying this to you, you'll notice it's a little B with a circle around it. So when you're at the grocery store the next time, you're shopping at, whatever department store or retailer you're going to, look for the certified B Corporation logo because you know that that business has been vetted and meets a higher standard and it thinks differently at a corporation level because they have been certified by B Lab. And I've taken that mindset into kind of every company that I've worked on and built. And the beauty of that is that others have noticed, and we're seeing more and more larger corporations become certified B corporations. And those are the companies that I choose to vote with my dollars with because I know that it's not just about the money, that there's impact that's happening outside of just shareholder profits.
Yeah, yeah, it's good to know. I'll definitely keep an eye out for that logo. Yeah, I think the voting with the dollar is the most powerful form of participation these days when political systems are so large and your vote is for one or two parties anyway that are probably both doing the same thing behind the scenes anyway. Yeah. So I wanted to ask about the economic incentives or systems and how they came about around the quality of the food. I imagine that it's like economies of scale as to why a lot of these ultra processed foods are so cheap. Do you think that more maybe regenerative agriculture, more organic farming can be more cost competitive with these industrialized systems if they were able to be supported and subsidized, kind of like these other more chemical based systems, if they were able to scale up as large where it'd be not so much of a cost difference?
That's a great question. And I think that the short answer is yes. And regenerative and organic is the future. And I believe that that is the goal that we should all be running towards. Local as well, I will throw in there because I think that that's a key component of making our food system sustainable in the long term is having the ability to produce food locally. And the challenge, I don't know if subsidies is the answer. I think subsidies kind of sometimes corrupt the capitalist system and can get out of hand because I think subsidies right now that have enabled some of these ultra processed food companies, when you look at soy, you look at corn, you look at so many of our agricultural products that are so heavily subsidized right now, have led to some of the choices that we've seen and end up in our ultra processed foods, the corn syrups and
Yeah, and everything.
the additives that get added in. So I think that I don't know that I would necessarily vote for additional subsidies for regenerative and organic, but I would vote for less subsidies overall to even and level the playing field so that people have the opportunity to look at a locally grown organic fruit or vegetable and not have it be twice as much as the pesticide ridden kind of mass farmed strawberry that they're buying from a supplier in a different country. And I think that that's where there's opportunity. And that's where I would love to see from a policy perspective things shift. But I think that, first and foremost, I don't like to put all of the weight on government because I think government is slow, government's inefficient, and government doesn't always know best. The consumers and the right now we're really fortunate that people are waking up and people are understanding that the food system is a problem right now. The foods that we're eating are a problem right now. I mean, you shop at the grocery store, you've heard people say this many times. Stay on the perimeters because everything on the inside of the grocery store, those inner aisles are just prepackaged junk. That's not actually food. If it's not refrigerated in most cases, it's not really food. It's made to be shelf stable and it's made with a bunch of added ingredients and dyes. And we've let that happen as we've kind of industrialized the food process over the past couple decades, which has done a lot from an affordability perspective. But look what the effect is having now on our health outcomes because
Right.
a few decades ago, the rate of chronic conditions was, I mean, some of these chronic conditions, diabetes and prediabetes, especially in kids, were non-existent. There was no such thing as kids with type 2 diabetes 30 years ago. We have done this to ourselves and we've allowed this to happen. And if there's any regulation that needs to happen, or, and I don't think it goes down to subsidies, but if there's regulation, that's the regulation that I would like to see, is less added ingredients, less ultra processed foods on the shelves, because that's what people have access to. And if they have access to it, that's what they're going to buy when it's the cheaper, less expensive alternative.
Right. Yeah. It reminds me, my dad used to work for Kraft Foods, and he was down the hall from the laboratory where they like invented Velveeta. And he's like, there's basically nothing real in there. Like the way they create it with like the chemicals that it's composed of is like, it could last forever. They just put an expiration date on there to make you think that it's going to go bad one day.
Yep.
It's like, and you're supposed to consume that, and your body's supposed to do what with it?
It's so
Just
true.
wild.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. So yeah, and I would love to keep talking all day about this, but I know we're coming up on our a lot of time. But maybe give you the opportunity to share with the audience any advice or different opportunities they may have to incorporate more of these types of meals, or go out and find, like you're saying, FareRx through their providers. Any kind of path or guidance around that for how they can improve their diets?
For sure. So first and foremost, one of the easiest ways that most people can start, if you have health insurance, chances are that you have access to a registered dietitian at zero cost to you. Most people have no idea that's an included benefit. And that is one of the best ways to start this journey and figure out what, get an audit of what you're eating right now, what's in your refrigerator, what's in your pantry right now, and what can you then do about it. So that's one of the things that we're adding at FareRx. We recently became a registered credentialed provider, and our RDs now work directly with patients who want to kind of better themselves and figure out what they can do, whether or not they have a chronic condition or not. They could be young, healthy, and they want to make sure that they're doing everything possible to stay that way. So I would say first, go find an RD, because you probably have one at your disposal for zero cost out of pocket. And more likely than not, you have multiple sessions per year available to you. And if you have a chronic illness, it's almost 100% across the board in this country that you have access to a registered dietitian for no money out of pocket.
Good to
So
know.
that would be the first place to start. Then the second place, I think, from a personal level, is what I was saying about the grocery store. When you go to the grocery store, shop the perimeter, shop the local farmers market when you can, and you'll notice that the farmers markets, I think, have a stigma of being significantly more expensive than a grocery store or where others are getting food from. But more times than not, there are opportunities to get similar items at much higher quality for very comparable prices, because you're cutting out the middleman in the retailer in those cases. So yes, it may be more expensive from if you were to buy it directly from a farm elsewhere, but because the farm is coming to you, then you're cutting out that grocery store retailer as the middleman, and you have the opportunity to then get higher quality foods. The challenge is that not everybody has access to farmers markets in their local community. And if you don't, and you are shopping in a grocery store, stay focused on fresh food, stay focused on whole foods that don't have a bunch of added ingredients. If you can't read and you can't say the ingredients on a label, then it's probably not a great food to be putting into your body, to be feeding your kids, to be feeding your parents. We're getting into a generation now, myself being on kind of the right smack dab in the middle of millennials, but specifically the older millennials now are a generation that is now caring for their parents as well as their kids. And one of the simplest forms of care is food. So if you are helping your parents or your kids eat, make sure you're giving them the best food that you possibly can. And I think, overall, for anybody that is a entrepreneur that's potentially listening to the show, or an aspiring entrepreneur that wants to get into this, I would say, please think about the impacts that your business can have outside of just making money. I think that is one of the things that has shaped my career more than anything else, is that no matter what happens long term with any business that I've ever built, what will never be able to be taken away from me is the impact each of my businesses has had. United by Blue removed 5 million pounds of trash. FareRx has delivered over 100,000 bags of groceries to seniors. Those impact metrics, when the business is long gone, the impact and the human impact was felt by people, and those have ripples. And I think that everybody that's building a business has the opportunity to find a way to do something that's outside of themselves and outside of their business, because I think that that is the future. That's, to me, that's the ideal future of what capitalism looks like, is organizations that can be really scrappy, really smart, really scaled, but also scale good work.
Yeah, yeah, that's beautiful. It's, rather than the traditional model of exploiting natural resources and exploiting labor and things like that, how can you restore the world around us? Use a business while making a profit to actually make the world a better place. That's an awesome aspiration, and congratulations on your work so far and all of the accomplishments. Thank you very much for taking the time, Mike. Really appreciate you coming on. Any last thoughts you want to leave the audience with before we break?
I would say the last thing is to sum that up. The saying that I always have is measure your life by impact over income.
Mm, I love that. Great words to end on. Thanks again, Mike, for coming on the show, and hope to see you again soon.
Thanks,
Thanks
JT.
everyone for listening.